First of all, I'd like to thank the JustData project and Professor Anand Murugeshan for the invitation. Anand's invitation to participate in this exciting workshop was extremely generous but rather daunting. Surveillance in the ancient world in 8 minutes. Go! Among such a select group of legal scholars, activists and data scientists, a historian of antiquity like myself is prone to appear as some monstrous exotic race, straight out of some illuminated medieval manuscript. I am afraid that the topic of my talk today won't help me blend in either. Inspired by the motto of the workshop, Power Watching People or People Watching Power, I invite you to reread with me in less than 8 minutes one of the most influential books ever written, The Apocalypse of John. Composed around the turn of the 2nd century, it is a grandiose exhibition of utmost power. John, its elusive author, might be writing in bad Greek, but no one can deny his artistic creativity in staging the most notorious production of Christian imagination that filled the hearts of generations with dread and hope. Don't expect me to guide you through the book's multiple scenes, heavy on symbolism and cryptic to the present. I will attempt something else. To do that, I have to start with a personal story. My mother was a puppeteer for over 30 years. As a child, that can be great fun, especially if you get to see all the shows for free. Her rehearsal, however, at home made me aware of what the other children did not know. I knew what was about to happen ahead of time. This bifocal view was my secret. It allowed me to visualize during the show the other puppets hanging from the ceiling behind the curtain, waiting anxiously the skilled hands and fingers that were about to bring them to life for a pinch of time. I invite you today for a collective bifocal look at the impressive spectacle depicted in the pages of the Apocalypse. The narrative elements in the text are connected by a striking ocular theme. You can either trust me on this, or if you don't, which I encourage you to do, go over the text at some moment of leisure and follow the eyes. First of all, there are the eyes of John, seeing things no one has seen before. Then there are the 4 cherubim, next to the divine throne, full of eyes all around and inside. There is also the exalted Christ with his eyes like a flame of fire, while in his aspect as the slaughtered lamb, he is described with 7 eyes. All these eyes induce an acute sense of being watched. As to substantiate this feeling, Christ repeatedly reminds the readers that he, quote, knows their works, even portraying himself as the one who searches minds and hearts, who will give to each of you as your works deserve. The concept of an all-seeing divinity is not original to the book of Revelation. It already had a remote history that can be traced all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia. While the gods of old seem initially to be concerned only with what people did or say, a shift seems to take place around the 7th century BCE, and we witness a divine surveillance which goes deeper, much deeper. To remain in the biblical setting, let me quote from the wisdom of Sirach. No thought escapes God, and nothing is hidden from him. Sorry, that's not here. It is easy to multiply examples from various texts of both religious or philosophical context, from classical Greece to the early Roman Empire. Unfortunately, it is impossible to quantify the impact such conceptualization of the divine had on common people. Early Christian literature provides, however, a chilling insight on the politicization of such divine regiments of total visibility. The author of the Epistle to the Hebrews, a text written toward the end of the 1st century, inculcates among its audience the idea that, quote, the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing until it divides soul from spirit, joints from marrow. It is able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart, and before him no creature is hidden, but all are naked and laid bare to the eyes of the one to whom we must render an account. Please note the recurring shame-inducing, humiliating language, total penetration, complete transparency, and absolute nudity in front of the highest class figure, that is God. What does such talk do? Well, it seems to craft the blueprint for a frightful hegemony of complete control whose subjects are denied what the rock bottom of Roman society, the slaves, still called their own, their thoughts. The ideal Christian is placed below the status of a slave, while slaves, whether male or female, were open to penetration beyond the shame-honor dichotomy in their nakedness, for their bodies didn't belong to them. Their hidden thoughts and intention were constantly a source of fear and discomfort for their Roman masters. It comes as no surprise that a few decades later, in the 150s, Christian writers addressing the Roman emperor could advertise the Christian communities as epitomizing the ideal imperial subjects, harbingers of a new kingdom ruled not by a regimen of punishment, implicating the laws, but by a regiment of fear. For the Christians don't even think of any transgression, let alone pursue it in secret. If these visions of social engineering send a chill down your spine, it comes as a relief to find out that certain people resisted such notions of total divine supervision quite vehemently. Cicero, for example, in his work De Natura Deorum, gives voice to an Epicurean questioning the Stoic concept of divinity by offering a tongue-in-cheek characterization. Quote, "So you have implanted in our heads the notion of an eternal Lord whom we are to fear day and night. For who would not stand in awe of a God who is a prying busybody, who foresees and reflects upon and observes all things, believing that everything is his business?" It is interesting to note that we find oblique evidence for such thought also in early Christian contexts. On the face of it, the book of Revelation seems very far away from such criticism, being a work that gives the impression of actually enforcing a total scopic regimen under the exalted Son of God, constructed as an elaborate otherworldly bureaucracy that materializes in a state-of-the-art comprehensive archival system that was thought to record in heavenly ledgers all the actions of mankind. But this is only half of the story. The divine visions given to John chart cataclysmic events in the future. The Apocalypse offers thus an exclusive view upon God's schedule under the rubric urgent tasks. And this dynamic actually empowered the readers of the text. For once humans had insight into the script of God, they were able to practice reverse surveillance by monitoring him from below, so to speak. They could attempt to make correlations between historical events and the apocalyptic script and predict the future, including the coming of Christ. To conclude, the current public debate over surveillance takes place almost exclusively in the long shadow cast by such thinkers of modernity as George Orwell and Michel Foucault. Policymakers and the general public remain to a larger part oblivious to earlier designs and models of supervision. Antiquity, however, had its own struggles with supervision and control, and that's a fascinating story which eventually told would allow us to discern reflections of ancient forms of power and resistance in the vast data archives, personal tracking devices, and the stalking camera lenses which surround us today. Thank you very much.
We are going to do this together because Shankar will speak primarily in Hindi and I'll try and do a little bit of translation, but we'll also use one film clip and a few slides which also have English subtitles on them. Firstly, I think both Usha and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, Tudor's presentations were both fantastic because of the philosophy of this whole area of thought and discussion. And unfortunately, we are going to be concentrating on one very small part of it in the whole philosophy of things, but it also helps us understand, for instance, from what Tudor is saying, how much the powers that be in all countries and definitely in India today also want to play God, or at least pretend to play God. So I think they know what they are doing, but they are lying in what they are actually doing. And so what we will try and place before you is our understanding from the ground, from the place where, as Usha said, where we are being made subjects of their particular objectives, and our experience with those people. So we come from the right to information movement, so very much from a movement of people from below who tried to understand how information has been used against people all these years and turn the tables, as it were, which again is something that Tudor alluded to, but we've had a very fascinating experience over the last 20 years in accessing that information that was used to control people, accessing that to try and start beginning to put controls on the state and to see that those who wield power are held accountable for the kind of power they wield, and using information in that respect. What has come along with this particular law, the UID, the Unique Identification ID, which is itself a misnomer, and there are numbers of misnomers in it. And I think one needs to understand what exactly it is. It's a law that has now made it practically mandatory. The law itself does not say it, but the instruments are there further in a series of notifications that will carry on and on to make everyone's biometrics be enrolled and available with that authority and therefore the state, and use biometric not to identify but authenticate every single interaction between the state and the people. That's where it started. So why did they need that authentication? They said that our welfare delivery, their beginning arguments, and even the law is called delivery of welfare to people. So it says that the state has a duty to deliver welfare, and in that it must do it efficiently, it must do it inclusive, including everyone, and it must do it by cutting out corruption. And there is no better way than biometric authentication. So behind that argument came the idea that if the state had this method of authentication, all problems would disappear. This is what they sold, that this was the magic bullet. People who were entitled to it would just come along, would place their biometric, meaning for now fingers, 10 fingers and iris. Down the line, as Usha says, it could become DNA, or it could become God knows what else, part of the human body that could be there. But those human body parts will present themselves as if when I present myself to take my welfare, my body is not there. But this separate body part will present itself, be authenticated by a single central server. So it's not even that biometrics are being used localized in a particular machine, or smart cards are being used, or multiple technologies are being used. A single technology linked together in a single server that can get at least record every one of those transactions. That's where it began. Now, Shankar, what we are going to jump because of lack of time to is in Rajasthan, the state where we are in, it has been put in use totally, and as per the authorities in the correct way. The state where Soumya is, it's actually not being used correctly and properly, but it's being used in our state correctly and properly, which is that it's being used for distribution fully of public distribution system food grains. So you can't get more welfare based than that, because there is a law in India called the Right to Food Act, which all of us fought for, got a fraction of the entitlement that we were trying to get for the poor, which says that 75% of India's population will get 5 kilograms of food grain, nothing else, just food grain, at 2 rupees a kilo. So I don't know how much 2 rupees is, a couple of cents. 4 cents. 10 of the horrit, what's the currency? Forit. 10 forits. Yeah, 10 forints. For 10 forints, you'll get 5 kilos of food grain per person a month. That it's been done there. It's been done on India's celebrated National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and it's been done on old age pensions, social security pensions for the elderly. You'll see in the film an example. Pehle film dekha de, phir tum bol do. We'll come straight into what is happening, but let me just explain to you the transaction. It means, firstly, every single Indian citizen who is a beneficiary, began with beneficiaries, I'll tell you how it's gone on to everyone else, has to first enroll themselves by getting all their 10 fingers prints and their iris scan put on the database. And every time someone goes to get rations or pensions or work, and maybe down the line every day of attendance, it will have to be authenticated against your biometric. So imagine the magnitude of that exercise. Every single transaction, every single day, going to a central server, getting authenticated, sending back a message saying authentication completed, and only then does the gate open for you to be able to get your 5 kilos of food grain. What has happened in rations we'll explain, but we'll show you a short video of an elderly woman who lives 1 kilometer from our house, and then Shankar will give you examples of what exactly has happened.
कोशिश की दियो मैं तहसील में तहसील की दीदी ने के भाई के मुर्गी के बंद हुए जी के मोबिया के क्या मुर्गी
6 महीना पहले तो डाकियो देन जातो के
कोई चंका हां चंका तो मैं वो देन जातो फेवरेट वो हां डाकियो दे तो ओटे मैं कौन क्यों तहसील में क्या कहते हैं फार्म भरा जो एक तो सरपंच का and एक वार्ड पर का and नंबर ला जो फार्म भरा जो तो देने मोटो कुछ तो के मोटो ने सिविल दराया मोटो तो मैंने लगे रात नन ओ वजन तो घणी मगजी तारे टेटे तो जानो नहीं आवे कोई आदिवासी को नहीं करो
कितना महीना दीदा आपे को
कि हो रहा था कितना महीने लगे भैया अब तो मन को
दीदा
हां
तो 8 महीना दीदा
हमने 8 महीना वे कितना वे माठ वाला
8 कोर्स किला
8 महीना तक क्यों दीदा पहले
हां ये
हां पहले नहीं दीदा
के कंप्यूटर मीडिया को मशीनों में नहीं दीदे
नहीं दीदा क्या आधार कार्ड है ना आधार कार्ड
आया कोई दीदी यूं दीदे
हां आधार कार्ड है and वो कौन के को खातो खुला है तो कनक भी मिले
अच्छा
and गेहूं भी मिले
ये तो भैया कंट्रोल में क्या अंगूठा उठा लगायो थो को पहला
देख ये जट मंडाया मिशन सब मटकी पर
हां
एक भी मिट गई
हां
बस हमारा फाता पड़े फाता पड़ गया है सब पड़ गया कोई कसर को नहीं हां
एक मिनट देखते हैं फिगर्स
1 lakh is 100,000.
So 300,000 people. So just to give you an idea, this woman died actually about, we went to her house. We went to her house and we discovered her from that list that we got with great difficulty using the right to information to extract that list to be able to find out who were on their stopped pension list. What happened was they shifted to this method of inclusion, so-called inclusion. 1 million people who were old age pensioners and disabled pensioners like herself who couldn't move, were unable to open bank accounts and get their biometric authentication done. And the bureaucracy was unable to give explanations for it. So it simply wrote dead, 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 duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. For 300,000 people, they wrote dead. For another 250,000 people, they wrote duplicate. For 500,000 other people, they wrote other reasons, which could have been anything under the sun. And they removed them and nobody knew. And the result was people like them waiting for 8 months for their rations, for pensions and rations, both of them. The only things they had to survive on. The day we went to meet this woman, when we got her name, because she was from our village, we got the list for our village. She had one roti. She had been eating one roti which some neighbor gave her because she had been turned into a beggar. One roti, one matki of water, one pitcher of water, which was lasted her a week. She used to dip half the roti in the morning and eat that half the roti in the morning and half in the evening. So actually, one second. There are a whole lot of others who we won't show in these other YouTube links, but the kinds of people who are there, Shankar will not now talk about, but it's really actually a tragic story of exclusion.
दाखू माँ जो फिल्म देखी, ये हंगर डेथ थी, क्योंकि उसको मिला ही नहीं और कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता सरकार को. उनको लगता है कि हमारी टेक्नोलॉजी हम जो बना रहे हैं इसके अंदर कोई आना है तो आओ, जो छूट गया तो छूट गया, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. और भारत में इतनी पॉवर्टी है कि उस वजह से जो गरीब लोग छूट जाते हैं वो छूट जाते हैं, कोई सुनने वाला नहीं. समझो इस बिल्डिंग में हम यहाँ लिफ्ट लगाए थे और सीढ़ियाँ बनाई नहीं, और आप कहो कि भाई लिफ्ट खराब हो गई, अब नहीं जा सकते ऊपर, तो एक विकल्प भी नहीं, तो वहाँ आधार नहीं है तो आपके लिए कुछ भी नहीं. आधार नहीं तो राशन नहीं, आधार नहीं तो नरेगा का काम नहीं, आधार नहीं तो पेंशन नहीं, सारी सामाजिक सुरक्षा बिना आधार के कुछ नहीं कर सकते. ये बुजुर्ग लोगों का अंगूठा चलता नहीं.
So Shankar is saying that she was a starvation death, a hunger death. 2 weeks after we met her, she died. She had become practically nothing of herself. And he says it's like for the poor, they're just a number. And if you're excluded in some way, there's no way you can get in. And this card and this biometric authentication has been made like you can only climb on a lift and go. There are no stairs, there's no alternative. There's only a lift. And you can't get on the lift. The lift is bad for you. So you're out, you're finished. You're of no value at all. So that's the story of.
अब ये इतना भरोसा टेक्नोलॉजी पे करना, वो उसको बनाने वाला भी इंसान ही है, और वो क्या निकाल रहे हैं कि इसकी वजह से हम करप्शन रोक देंगे, इसकी वजह से वेरीफाइड करप्शन हो रहा है. आपकी अब मशीन से अंगूठा लग गया, इसका मतलब उसका सब कुछ हो गया. पीडीएस में आराम से आप उसमें करप्शन कर रहे हैं. ऑफिस में जाओ, आप बाहर अंगूठा लगाओ, आपकी अटेंडेंस हो गई, आप दिन भर ऑफिस में ड्यूटी दे दिए, आप अंदर घुस के वापस निकल गए और दिन भर कुछ भी नहीं किया, तब भी वो मशीन तो ये नहीं कहेगी उसने काम ही नहीं किया. तो आप इतना भरोसा कर जाओ. ये बात ठीक है, टेक्नोलॉजी का आना चाहिए टेक्नोलॉजी, लेकिन अपनी ज़रूरत के हिसाब से तो आए ना.
वो फोटो दिखाने,
हाँ, वो उसके सभ्यता के हिसाब से इंसान आगे बढ़ रहा है, लेकिन इतना भी आगे बढ़ जाए कि इंसानों को पीछे छोड़ दे और केवल अपनी मशीन और टेक्नोलॉजी को लेके आगे बढ़ता जाएगा. खूब सारे ऐसे आप चेहरे देख सकते हैं.
It's there in English, the subtitles are.
No, what he said before.
So Shankar is saying that what you have done is you've really completely dehumanized everything. You think technology does everything. You say that once technology is there, it's provided all the answers. There are no questions beyond that. So you say biometric authentication and you say, oh, people are working as soon as their fingerprint is put. But they come and put their fingerprint and go off. And you have no accountability for whether they have done any work at all or not. So you are not looking into what is the human condition. You are only trusting one particular technology and saying that that is the God. And that is actually, we'll come to the surveillance part later, but this is in all that they are talking about technology in terms of delivery.
ये चेहरे अपने आप आपको बताइए, ये अभी है, ये ऐसा नहीं है कि भाई ये लोग नहीं, ये लोग हैं, आज भी इसकी ऐसी स्थिति है.
तो मर गए इनमें से.
हाँ, ये डोकरा जिंदा है और अंगूठा नहीं लगता, इसलिए गेहूँ नहीं मिलता. अंगूठा नहीं लगता इसलिए वो बीसी बैंक वाला वो पेंशन नहीं देता, इसको भीम जाना पड़ता है, वहां से टैक्सी में किराया देके.
His elderly people's biometrics don't show up. So he gets neither rations nor pensions.
It's partly because they work, labor class works very
No.
hard.
Yeah.
I don't have.
Okay.
It's now, India is the biggest, as Usha will tell you, the biggest biometric experiment going on in the world. Because it's with the whole population. And we are finding young children don't show up, elderly people don't show up, working people don't show up, but they won't do anything about it because they have decided this is the way they're going to do delivery.
मिड डे मील भी नहीं अब तो.
Now, midday meal, they've started it for midday meal for children in schools, that they won't give them food in schools if they don't have their biometric authentication.
आगे कैसे बढ़ेगा?
हाँ.
वापस पीछे चला गया. ये वही जो वीडियो में था. आगे चलो. ये एक बंदा है जिसका एक हाथ नहीं है. एक ही हाथ है, एक हाथ कटा हुआ, एक फैक्ट्री में मजदूरी कर रहा था. तो ये जब आधार बनाने गया तो उसने कहा 10 उंगली लगाओ. अब ये प्राइवेट वो आधार बनाते हैं ना, 10 उंगली लगा दी, इसके 5 ही है, तो इसने 5 लगा दी. और पास में कोई खड़ा था, उसको कहा तेरी 5 लगा दे, और आधार बना दिया, क्योंकि आधार बनाना जरूरी था. अब उसके बाद ये भटक रहा है क्योंकि इसका
This man, why don't
Yeah, so he lost one of his one palm in an accident, work-related accident, and so when he had to get his other the card, so the biometrics, you need both your hands, and so basically they used one of his hands, and then they said, okay, you don't have another hand, they just called somebody else and asked the other person to put his other hand on the system. So every time it's going to be a problem because it's not going to register.
For both of them, because even that person will not be able to get, and neither will him, neither could he get his. No, sorry.
नहीं और है, लेकिन दूसरा डॉक्यूमेंट में.
Oh, okay. So anyway, और
हाँ. दूसरा, मेरे को किसी ने कहा कि ये आधार से आपकी सारी जानकारी लेके इनको पूरा डिटेल पता लग जाएगा कि आपके पास क्या क्या है, तो आपके बारे में वो पूरी ज़िंदगी का पता लगा देंगे, तो आपकी कितना कमाते हो वो भी पता लग जाएगा. गरीब आदमी का पूरा हिसाब उनके पास आ जाएगा कि इसको पेंशन कितना मिलता है, और अब कह रहे हैं सारा ऑनलाइन करेंगे, तो उसके खाते में अगर उसको लगता है 30,000 रुपये एक साल के आ सकते हैं, तो कोई कह रहे हैं ऐसा, जो ऐसी कॉन्फ्रेंस में पता लगा कि कोई कंपनी या बैंक आपको क्रेडिट पे कर्जा देगी, और आपको मान लो 30,000 रुपये आपके साल के आते हैं, तो आपको 25,000 रुपये का कर्जा दे देगी. गरीब आदमी आसानी से कर्जा ले लेगा, अगर आसानी से मिल रहा है तो उसको लगेगा कि चलो पैसा मेरे तो, और बाकी और बहुत मांगते रहते हैं, वो ले लेगा, और फिर उसके बाद ऑटोमेटिक उसके जितनी स्कीम का पैसा है वो उसके खाते से कट होता जाएगा, तो वो और भी ज़्यादा बुरी स्थिति में पहुंच जाएगा.
So Shankar's drawing one more parallel with welfare, that we've been told that now the entire profile, credit profile of everyone will be available, that they get rations, they get pensions, they get some other loan, they have access to the following welfare schemes. Any bank or any other commercial enterprise will be able to link, and that is something that is being advertised actually by the UID authority, saying that now we will be able to give loans to the poorest of the poor and automatically cut their money as soon as it comes into the accounts. So these are people who won't even get their pensions because they'll take some loan. After that, the money will just automatically disappear, and they will also disappear off the map. To give you the larger figures,
Money will disappear how?
will be automatically cut from their bank account and be given back to the online to the credit agency. This is being done illegally just now, even with employment guarantee wages, where banks are recovering their loans which they've given even to some other family member without taking permission from any of the persons concerned. But so all that people, this marriage between the commercial enterprises and the state, as far as the poor are, to squeeze them out of even their welfare benefits and make benefit out of that, is part of this enterprise. Very quickly, I just want to say two things. One is the extent of this damage. Rajasthan is one of the only states, and the Food Security Act is one of the only programs where it has been done in total. So there are a total of 10 million ration card holders who are supposed to get these rations. Out of those 10 million, 3 million for the last 8 months are unable to draw their rations because of biometric. Those who are entitled, 3 million are unable to. It's on the government website. Those figures are there. From the month of September till now. That means 10 million people, because on one ration card are several multiples of people, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, it's a family, 3 million families. That's the extent to which the poorest of the poor are being excluded because of this, leave alone inclusion, completely excluded. Corruption, as Shankar talked about, that ration dealer is doing the same as he did before, because he puts your thumb impression there and he says, oh, it didn't show up, and he pockets it. Or as before, he used to get you to sign on a register. Now he says, here, you only 4 kilos came from above, not 5 kilos or 2 kilos, or come once every 3 months. Does exactly as he did before. So corruption, but government says now corruption is eliminated because your thumb impression is there. So you cannot complain against it. So that's as far as corruption is concerned. And their third claim of efficiency, these damn machines don't work in rural areas. Just now, a very interesting thing happened. One of our very good friends, Santosh Mathew, came with us, and he was one of the bureaucrats, star bureaucrats who helped put this whole thing into place. He was in the Heidelberg workshop, and we kept telling him, look at it, what you're doing, what kind of a machine you put into place. And he kept saying, no, we went, Heidelberg, half the shops wouldn't take cards.
90%.
Now, yeah, 90%. Everywhere we went, they said, no, it's not efficient, it doesn't work. And they're trying to put cashless down our throat after this. That's the next step. We went to a train, and at that place, that the chap who was giving tickets, the guy who was giving tickets said, no, we won't. The machine was there, and he said, no, oh, finally I found a machine, let me put in my card. And he said, no, you can't put in because it's not working. He said, of course it'll work. And he put it in once and twice. And it wasn't working because the internet wasn't working in Heidelberg. Now in Devdungri, in the desert, in some places, people are taking those machines, looking for internet connectivities, climbing up the top of the hill, carting all the ration people with them, that please come where we get connectivity, there we'll put your thumb impression, then go back to the ration shop, then pick up your grain, and they're spending the whole day and making multiple trips. Some people think internet comes when the clouds come. Some people think internet comes when the clouds don't come. There are all kinds of prayers to the God, because the God is this technology. Now, surveillance part of it, what they are doing, and the biggest scam that they are doing, is they are now seeding this onto every single kind of database. If I buy a train ticket, they started with welfare. Since when has train travel become welfare? If I buy an air ticket, if I am paying taxes, if I am not paying taxes, if I am rehabilitated from being a sex worker, if I am rehabilitated from being a Bhopal gas victim, if I am rehabilitated from having HIV and receiving medicines, that's if I am rehabilitated from being bonded labor, every single place they're putting it in. Now tomorrow, if for train travel, for instance, where they wanted to put it in first for the elderly, for their concessions and others, if they start putting this number in, they're seeding the number. So every time I buy a train travel ticket, my number gets seeded. I don't place my biometric, because they know fully well that if I start placing my biometric, there'll be chaos. No one will be in the train. They'll be out there fighting with the people saying my biometric is not working. What is it? Let me travel. Do whatever it is. So they are simply seeding the number. Why? Because they want all the data together. They want the data of who's traveled where, who's stayed where, who's bought what, which bank account is where, who's doing what, who's everything related to it they want. So it is the ultimate in surveillance. It is being able to watch every citizen, every moment of the day, everywhere, and not a question of authentication, just a question of drawing all that information together so that they can become, I think when they wrote those biblical texts, they didn't have this in hand. Now these guys think that they have it in hand, and therefore it's a dream come true for them. So the new gods, who are very evil gods, definitely, I don't know about those ones, but these ones who are sitting there, who are happy to have people struck off the list, because that's the worst thing. They call all of this savings. Pick up Indian newspapers. The Prime Minister, last thing, says $5 billion we've saved in gas. They say we've saved on rations. The people, when we went complaining, saying you have removed, you're killing 3 million people who are not giving rations to the poorest of the poor. They said these are all false people, these are savings. We said, how are they false? Oh, their biometric doesn't show. So it's a tautology. Yeah, so it's a corruption-free India. It is the most worst form of corruption that you can think about. And to prove it, we asked, okay, tell us one single case of all these big corruption cases where you have taken any criminal action. $5 billion has been stolen year after year from you. Every year now you've suddenly saved it. Who have you acted against? There is not one single case where they've taken action, because they're just using this as a means of exclusion, means of control, means of doing everything that is wrong. And for us, the most threatening thing is that those of us who have now started to find ways to use information, to hold them to account, they've found another way once again to hold all of us within their pincers to do what they want to, and with the whole country and the whole state. And by the way, while Soumya comes there, the World Bank wants to export this from India to every quote-unquote developing middle-income country, because it's the best way for development.
Well, after that presentation, my job becomes slightly easy and maybe a little more difficult where I work. I head the social audit institution that's been set up by the state of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. It was the first state to have set up an independent institution to carry out social audits where citizens would be trained to verify what government was spending on them, whether it was spent efficiently or not, and whether the benefits have been reaching the poor or not. I'd like to start with an anecdote. A few years ago, this entire experiment that's happening in India began in the state where I work. So the composite state of Andhra Pradesh, which now has been split into 2 states, was where the initial testing of biometrics, initial testing of UID, initial testing of computerization of welfare schemes actually began. In 2012, there was this huge UID launch that took place in a particular district in Andhra Pradesh, and the then Union Minister for Rural Development had also come for that launch. UID, computerization of welfare schemes, all of this is not part of just this government. It's been on the agenda, I think, for the last 8 to 10 years. And it began, I think, in 2004-05 when there was a slowdown in the West as far as the IT technologies were concerned, companies were concerned. And a huge number of Indian companies that actually invest into the IT technology. Silicon Valley is full of Indians. You go anywhere, it's full of IT companies that have tie-ups. So I think somewhere they found that linking technology to development in India would be great, because they wouldn't find a bigger platform. And government does have the money to now spend on these kind of welfare schemes. So when this launch took place, the Union Minister was asked by the press, do you have an Aadhaar card? Because you're going about telling everyone they should have Aadhaar cards. Have you enrolled? And his response to me was very interesting and very revealing, because it actually relates back to what you had to say, Tudor. He said, no. So the press said, but you're talking about the great benefits of Aadhaar, so why is it that you don't have an Aadhaar card? And his response shocked me further, because he said, well, because I'm not a beneficiary of the state. Now, which member of parliament and which member of legislative assembly is not the biggest beneficiary of the state? Your salary, your car, your house, your travel, your pension, everything is taken care by the state. Now compare a member of parliament's pension or even salary with Dhaku Devi's pension. She gets 1,000 rupees. 500 rupees. Well, Andhra gives 1,000, so 500 rupees, and think what a minister would get when he retires. So that's where this whole agenda is important, to understand what is happening with technology. I use technology. My work would not be possible if I didn't have technology. because it makes sure that the social audit happens in a 15-day time period. I'm able to, get information off the net from the databases which are used for verification that happens in the villages. So again, one isn't against technology. One has a problem with the way in which it's being used, or the way in which it is being sold to people as the solution. So is that the only solution that can be used? So interestingly, if you see, the entire process of mapping people, having Aadhaar, biometric, I know Usha and a lot of my activist friends would actually say, we don't agree with you on certain aspects. I said, start with government servants. Start with government schools. Every time you enroll, every time you hire a teacher, get their biometrics, get them to, put in their biometrics, make sure that their salary is linked to the performance that is there. So they have to turn up at the hospital, they have to turn up at the school, you're doing it to the poor. But government would never be able to do it. Because I think the unions in India are so strong, the employees' unions, that if they were to have started with them, much smaller group, it wouldn't have worked. So the easiest was to actually start with the poor. So the entire assumption here is that the poor are thieves. Now, if I want to create a fake ration card for myself, I can't do it myself. I will have to go to a corrupt official to get that ration card made. But who is being held accountable here? The poor person who's going and enrolling for a ration card is being told, you're a thief, so I want your UID number to make sure you are who you are and you deserve this benefit. Whereas the person who is making my ration card will not be held accountable for having created that first fake ration card in the first place. Now, where do social audits come in? So when we had this whole interaction with the minister at that point of time, they said, so do you think Aadhaar is a magic bullet? Will it resolve issues of being able to completely curb corruption? And so he said, no, I'm not saying it's a panacea for all evils. I'm just saying it's a way of identifying the right beneficiary to do efficient service delivery targeting. So we want efficiency, we want efficient service delivery targeting. Now my job becomes even more difficult with the social audit process, because what do my teams do? What does the agency that I head do? It trains community members to pick up information that's already available on the web, go into the villages and start questioning. So what is it that we found through the social audit process? Dakudevi would be dead and gone, but I wouldn't be surprised that there is a pension that's going on in her name. So that's what we found, instances where a person has died, but the pension is still being drawn. And when we started verifying why those pensions were still being drawn, we found that very smartly, once this woman had died, it wasn't reported to government. Her pension ID was seeded with somebody who was alive, because that whole transaction is a manual transaction. Somebody has to actually enter the UID number against the pension ID number. So a woman who's dead and gone still receives pension, except that somebody else is going and putting in the biometric imprint and taking the money. So how is it foolproof? How do you say that, these processes are so, use of technology is so foolproof that you can completely and totally curb corruption? The other part of the problem is that technology has become the word of God. It's the gospel truth. So if your biometric authentication is being done very smartly, I think Indians are ingenious in being able to find solutions that work for them. So if they want to be corrupt, they'll find ways of being corrupt. Now, interestingly, when we started doing these social audit exercises, going and asking people how many days did you work, how much money did you get paid or not, we found that a person who had worked for 3 weeks had been paid for 8 weeks. And we were very surprised. We said, but the record says you worked only 3 weeks. He said, yeah, I worked only 3 weeks. We said, how much did you get paid? He said, I got paid for 3 weeks. So we were, we found this baffling. We said, they're saying Aadhaar, it's impossible, biometric payment, you can't cheat the system. So when we went back to the post office just to observe, what we found was that the POS machine, the point of sale transaction machine, has a device which you can switch on and switch off. So if you switch it off, it goes mute. It doesn't give a message. So essentially, the postmaster or the bank officer who is supposed to be disbursing the money simply turned that volume button off. So this person comes in, he says, oh, put in your biometric. So he puts in his biometric. He says, yeah, you worked, this is your money. gives him 3 weeks of money and keeps the rest with him. Now, when we fight with the bank saying, how did you pay for 3 weeks and not 8 weeks? He says, your laborer is lying. We paid him for 8 weeks. We didn't pay him for 3 weeks. You go back and check, his biometric imprint is there. How do I prove? Ultimately, the person who's disbursing the money is doing a manual intervention and giving, it's a human hand that's handing out the money. So when I started raising these issues with the system, they said, yes, it's a very serious issue. You know, maybe what we should now start having is ATMs in the village. Now, the entire process of trying to bring, people to the bank, I think cash management, if you ask any banker, is the biggest nightmare. Now, if you want to bring ATMs to the bank, where is it going to come from? The other instance we found through our social audit process was that one single biometric imprint for 8 weeks of payments. When you start asking banks questions, interestingly, now government says, my transaction is only to ensure that a person works and I put the money into the bank account. What happens between the bank and the customer is no longer my business. So I'm not going to get into it. It's a banking, it's within the banking business. Only the person who is aggrieved can go back to the bank. We can't interact. We found when we started doing data analysis that the banks were actually fixing information that they were giving to government. They wouldn't allow information to come straight on to government server. They said it will come through an intermediary server. Again, within technological terms, it's very difficult to figure out who is saying what. If you don't know technology and you're not an engineer, you're not a computer engineer, you don't understand it, you're simply in a situation where whatever they say is the truth. What we ask becomes redundant. So imagine a scenario where you have person after person coming back with grievances, being told that, yeah, there is a problem. So we have NREJ laborers who haven't been paid for 3 years because the banking correspondent ran away with 1 crore of money. And the bank says, but we've got all the fingerprints and we are not able to resolve whether it's the bank that made a mistake or whether it was government that made a mistake or whether the labor is lying. So years after years, these grievances build up. Every time we go back to these villages, the first thing people stand there and tell us is, you come back to verify every single year what we've got, what we've not got. For the last 3 years, we've been telling you that payments haven't been made. Resolve that and then come back to talk to us. So it's become a situation where you have no grievance redress. You have absolutely no one to turn to. And when you do have a grievance, government itself is very, helpless. And the other part is there might be a lot of state governments that do not want. So, for instance, the difference between Rajasthan and Andhra or Telangana is that at least in Telangana and Andhra, the government, the bureaucracy has been very clear. When I've sat through these meetings where people say, so the biometric fingerprints are not working, biometric machines are not working, what do? They are talking about solutions. So they've worked out local solutions to be able to do the payments. But there are states like Rajasthan which will say, no, whatever is being told from the top, that's what we are going to follow. And this centralized mechanism of actually pushing things down the throat of states, if a state decides that we will not do biometric, I can guarantee you 100% they will not get funds from the central government. They'll be told, no, you fall into this category or you find your own ways of being able to fund your schemes. So interestingly, the chief ministers of both our states, at least to a great extent, have been saying, at the end of the day, whether you use technology, don't use technology, if you can use it, but find citizen-centric solutions. If a person comes and says that I haven't got a response, I haven't been able to access my right, make sure that right is accessed. In all other states, I don't know what the situation is, but to think that a single fit will suit the entire country actually means that the poor are slowly getting further and further away from the entire process of governance, because they are being told now that if you have a problem, you have a website, please log on to the website, leave your grievance. Please call the call center and leave your grievance. You don't need to come to a government institution and waste your time. So the bureaucracy is getting further and further and further away from the citizens. The citizens don't know whom to turn to. And in that, when we go to do these social audit processes, that's probably the only process where they have a citizen interaction with government. Otherwise, existing systems are completely collapsing with no new system being put into place. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Taha Yasseri. I am from the Oxford Internet Institute, University of Oxford. Well, I'm going to talk about other type of government-society interactions through social media, which is slightly different to what has been discussed so far and probably what is going to be discussed later. So I apologize for being a slightly off topic, but at the same time I wanted to also show a glimpse into the other direction of these two-way interactions and how technology, and particularly how social media, could help us to basically have a better source of interaction. What has been discussed, and I think is the main topic of this workshop, I suppose, is a top-down model of digitally mediated interaction. What I'm going to talk about is mostly about the bottom-up approaches, how data or how new technologies could help societies and citizens talk to the government within a different and new environment that is changing the way that politics is working these days. Most of the data that I'm going to show and the ideas are taken from this book that was published about 2 years ago, co-written by my colleagues, Professor Helen Margetts, Peter John, and Dr. Scott Hale. Well, the title of the book is Political Turbulence and How Social Media is Changing the Way Collective Action is Happening these days. Well, we have been fighting with the publisher for the topic. For the title of the book, our overall initial idea was Turbulence Pluralism, but they said, well, that's a very convoluted title. Let's go for something simpler, and this is what we ended up with. So I'm going to try to explain what this title means, basically, in the next 5 minutes. Well, these days people live online, at least for most of countries, a very large percentage of people are using digital technologies and internet-based technologies to socialize, to interact, to, even do their business. In many different aspects of life, these technologies are quite present. However, the big question would be how this, dripping data lifestyle that we have taken would change the way that politics is working. This is impossible these days to live without leaving digital footprints behind. As long as I have a cell phone, I'm sending all this information to my operator. As soon as I have a social media account, I'm sharing a lot of data with the platform owners. And this data, of course, could be sold or could be passed to other parties and other interested bodies. This is a rather outdated picture which shows the number of Facebook users in different parts of the world. They're all increasing, of course, with different extent and with different rates. But, if I was going to give this talk 5 years ago, I had to argue for the fact that is Facebook population representative or not? But these days it's very easy argument for me because more than, from every 4 people, more than one of them are on Facebook and and other social media. So it's not really a problem anymore to argue that social media have entered our lives. And using Twitter for political activities again was a very novel idea 5 or 10 years ago. But these days, partly thanks to President Trump, politics and Twitter are basically the same thing. You might even announce new policies on Twitter as a president of the United States. So it's very ignorant of us if we just say, well, whatever happens online stays online. Well, online and offline are intermixed these days. You can petition the governments online. You can organize rallies. You can organize, interest groups and pressure groups online. Most importantly, online social media allows us to have tiny acts and tiny bits of participation. My mom is not a political person. She used to be when she was a student, but for personal reasons, she has stopped doing politics for many years. But since she's online and she's on Facebook from a few years ago, she starts sending me pictures and very little movies, very basic things that she would not even consider political. But of course, what she does is a political act. You know, she's sharing this information, and sometimes these little tags could scale up to something very big. You know, I have very few examples here, but I'm sure you all know of your own examples how over the past few years activities or you know, mobilizations that have been basically movements that have been mobilized through social media led to a big change. Sometimes change of the regime in a country, sometimes emergence of a new party or a new policy, change of a policy in a different country. You know, pictures like this, which were produced in, I think it's a football game in Germany, have encouraged or led people coming from those countries, from different parts of the world. So these all big changes happen and are more facilitated through social media. However, there is also the flip side of it that we have to be careful about. So I have here another example. This is the number of signatures to 2 different petitions on the UK government petitioning website. Well, this is a logarithmic scale. You see that within few days, within a day or two, there are more than 10,000 signatures collected. But then there is another petition. The first petition is a black Donald Trump from visits to the UK. The other one is a don't ban Trump from the visit to the UK. Well, 2 very opposing ideas, but very similar dynamics, and on the same platform next to each other. So that sounds very interesting from a democratic point of view. You know, you could have all these ideas being represented at the same time, and then, you know, depending of whom you want to support, what idea you are supporting, you could express yourself. However, when you look at all the other petitions on the same website, which we have done here, again, these are about 20,000 different petitions. Each line represents the number of signatures over time. You see a majority of them, about 99.9 of them, never get to any bigger number than, you know, 100 signatures. And just for your reference, the government only responds to petitions which have more than 10,000 signatures, and the parliament only considers a topic if it has more than 100,000 signatures. Well, some of them made it up, you know, a handful of them have made it to over 100,000, but 99% of them just what we call digital dust. They remain there forever, but they have zero value. So that's the other side of social media and basically internet-based political activities. The fact that some of them become viral, some of them become extremely popular, but majority of them never gain any attention whatsoever. Well, there are, of course, ways of using this data. I mean, the current situation, no one looks into petitions that never made it to a big number. But one could actually look more carefully into those cases, and I'm showcasing petitions as just a simple case. It could be applied to, you know, all sorts of digital or online platforms and social media. So yes, this is basically a summary of these 2 points. There is more democracy, there is more potential for pluralism online, but at the same time, in a way, politics has become more unpredictable and more unstable just because of the same features that social media have. This is an example of what could be done. We have analyzed all the 20,000 petitions on the UK website. We use computational methods to analyze the content of the petition, and we extract topics from the content, so using an algorithm which is called topic modeling. And it gives us like the most important topics that have been brought up more frequently on the different petitions. And then, you know, we can do some analysis, which I'm not going through the details, but then you could start to build networks of topics and how they are related to each other within the context of these petitions to the UK government. And you can already see that, you know, a big number of petitions here are related to the referendum, the Brexit referendum, and then you can see there is a good connection to the work-related topics and the government-related topics. Here comes the NHS, education, family, and they make a cluster here. Animal rights, which is rather isolated, etc., etc. So this is just an example of how this huge amount of data coming from people could be harvested and analyzed to extract ideas for policy making and to be used by the governments. Let me sum up. Basically, tiny acts of participations are possible these days, and they can scale up to larger scale mobilizations, but let's remember that mostly don't. Lacking leaders, institutional organization, and collective identity, these movements have no leaders because they are grassroots for most, and a good example of that is the unrest that we had in Brazil a few years ago, and when the president wanted to talk to the leaders of the protesters, basically there was no leader. And that's again another feature of online or social media-driven mobilizations. They are unstable and unpredictable. We have few chapters arguing why they have become more unstable and unpredictable, but to summarize, it's basically due to the feedback loops that we have in online platforms. You know, these days I see a tweet, I already see how many other people have retweeted already. This social information would affect my behavior and leads to some sort of rich gets richer process, which makes online mobilizations unpredictable and unstable. And finally, well, it allows for a chaotic pluralism, which has the pluralism in it, but it's also chaotic. And finally, we would like to suggest that the government have to come up with tools and new institutional organizations which could basically make use of this data in order to inform the policy-making process. Thank you.
But what I would like to do is basically focus on 4 issues. The first issue that I want to sort of focus on is one, try and give a certain context to the kind of times that we are living in, and try and see as to how best can we engage with what I would call as the dataization of society, which Usha very nicely brought out, saying that there is a certain process by which the entire society is getting more and more data-centric. So the point that I want to make, I think, can be best explained by a couple of statistics. At this particular point in time, there are 11 billion devices which are connected to the internet. The human population is around 7.5 billion. So there are already 11 billion devices connected to the internet. That's one. Number 2, we are generating close to 4.4 zettabytes of data. 1 zettabyte is 10 to the power 21 bytes. And it is expected that by 2020, we would be generating 44 zettabytes of data, and by 2025, 180 zettabytes of data. Third, all of this is based on 5 things: storage devices, sensors, handheld devices, algorithms, and what I would call as manifestations. Aadhaar is a manifestation of all of these things put together. So in some way or the other, we are seeing a certain kind of a material foundation for all the way that the data is being processed, and some sort of a manifestation in terms of a singular, a certain kind of a singular interface that is going ahead and ensuring that our data is both collected and at the same time the logic of a material foundation is transmitted to us. So how do we sort of engage with us? Of course, this has direct questions on identity, which is one of the focus of my research, saying that how do we as individuals get digitally coded, and what kind of a digitally coded identity are we going to grapple with or engage with? Now, if I have to sort of take this discussion forward and saying that this is the scenario that we are in, the genie is out of the bottle, there are already 11 billion devices, and whether we like it or not, we are bang in the middle of a data society. Now, if I have to sort of go ahead and say that in this particular context, what is our role? Do we have any control over the data that is being generated? And if we are going to become data sources in some way or the other, if we are going to become data points, if society is going to treat us in some way or the other as data, then are we the new raw material? If we are the new raw material, then are we being mined? If we are being mined, then what happens to digital rights? If my data, which is no longer virtual, so we are making a clear distinction between data that was already available on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Pinterest, because that is still a virtual world, that is still distantiated from you. But today, the data is being generated from us because there are devices that track us. So whether it's a Fitbit sensor, whether it's an health app, whether it's your ability to go ahead and connect to a device, whether, as Nick Bostrom and others talk about superintelligence and singularity, whether it's going to be a chip embedded into us, which is already happening in some countries like Sweden, where you have chip being embedded in your foreskin. Then if data is being derived from me as an individual and I'm being mined, and if it is my natural resource, then should we start looking at this data society from the point of view of digital rights and what are my rights there, right? So then we have questions about individual and collective rights. Then if I'm being mined in a particular way, then should we start looking at regulatory frameworks that are more in employment in the pharmaceutical sector? Am I being clinically trialed? So to give you a simple example, to put it in context, the focus is, and I'll end with this particular example. Biometric identification systems have something called as the equal error rate. That's how the error rates are computed. And there is something called as the failure to enroll rate. So which means that you're trying everything, what Nikhil and Shankarji was talking about, you're trying everything and you're just not getting enrolled. That's 5%. That's 5%. It's accepted, 5%. Then there is something called as the false acceptance rate. Nikhil's biometrics are scanned and I'm using Nikhil's biometrics. For some strange reason, Nikhil and I have got interchanged. That's 3.15%. And there is something called as the false rejection rate. My biometrics are all fine, but the system just doesn't accept it. That's 10.52%.
Wow.
India has 1.3 million people, 1.3 billion people. 10.52% is not a statistic. It's a huge number of people. So two critical points that I want to make. I am a natural resource. I'm being mined. What do I do about it? Two, should I go ahead and start looking at creating a new debate about digital rights? Should I start looking at my samples, my digital samples, as bio-digital samples? Should I start looking at it in terms of DNA? If my DNA can be protected, my tissue samples can be protected, my body fluids can be protected, this also needs to be protected in a similar manner. So that's point number one that I'm trying to make. Second is, as far as Aadhaar and Indian state is concerned, Aadhaar, at least in my mind, is a manifestation of the way the Indian state has spanned across the last 60 years. So I can see three inflection points. Aadhaar is the fourth inflection point. The first inflection point was flush after the post-independence period, where it was a modernist, scientifically rational state. There was a planned economy. Nehru was there. Of course, you had a different school of thought which called the state as elitist, casteist, classist, and whatnot. But end of the day, the bottom line was that democracy and development was seen as two sides of the same coin. There was a welfare state, there was a social welfare model, and that continued for a certain period of time. The second that was inflection point one, and it continued for a decade and a half. PC Malobines, the planning economy, etc. So I don't want to get into the details. The second inflection point for me happened when Indira Gandhi took over. There was a political economy of that particular period where a certain amount of inter-party politics took over, and there was a certain control mechanics associated with that. Their development and electoral politics became two sides of the same coin. So from democracy and development, it became development and electoral politics. So the compulsions of electoral politics, booth management, which community is voting, which community is not voting, defined what kind of development paradigm was followed and how did development reach those particular kind of communities. Right? That was the second inflection point. The third inflection point has two semi-inflection points. One was the liberalization phase during Rajiv Gandhi's time, where the state for the first time started distantiating itself from its role as something that needs its role as a repository of our votes, and trying to say that development is something that is private, statecraft and governance is something that is public. So liberalization was the first time where development and democracy started deviating. The second phase of liberalization, 91-92, where the balance of payments crisis, was where that particular thought process crystallized, and development and democracy were considered to be two separate things, wherein the market forces were considered to be the harbinger of growth, or were considered to be the primary force that needed to go ahead and take care of development. So the bottom line was that then development was considered as a separate trajectory and democracy was considered as a separate trajectory. The fourth inflection point that we are having at this particular point in time, which is through Aadhaar, is that this circle has come down a full cycle, wherein democracy was considered as development. Now development is being considered as democracy. So what model of development, how do you develop, is being informed, is the one that is informing as to what kind of a state are you going to have. And in that sense, Aadhaar is a manifestation of the fact that a certain kind of a development paradigm and a development logic has started infecting the state. And this development paradigm is very, very simple in terms of treating the citizens as consumers, treating the citizens as people who need to be given services, treating the citizens as people who are beneficiaries, treating the citizens as people who will not be treated collectively, where what would otherwise be a relationship of trusteeship is now becoming a system of compensations. So you are going ahead and saying that, look, there is something called as a collective subsidy meant for farmers. Now that collectivity or the collectivization approach is completely gone. So you are going ahead and using an Aadhaar to go ahead and have an independent relationship with a Swami or a Nikhil, saying that has your direct benefit transfer come to your account, which means that my collective bargaining power vis-a-vis the state has been completely destroyed, and Aadhaar destroys that collective bargaining power, which is very critical for a democracy or a system of rights to function. So this is as far as the Aadhaar in Indian state is concerned. Now, as far as Aadhaar and its relationship with citizens are concerned, when Aadhaar was started off, it was said that, okay, fine, Aadhaar is going to be first among equals. There is the election identity card, which goes ahead and gives you a certain kind of an identity as far as a democratic identity is concerned. There is a permanent account number which gives you an indication of your so-called economic citizenship. But from being a first among equals, being the only identity available, okay, completely changes the relationship of a state that has with a citizen, or a citizen has with a state. So what it does is that it brings in certain kinds of logic which are associated with fiscal efficiency. Governance is seen as something that is apolitical in nature, and the citizen in this is seen as a cost center. It's a business model logic. A citizen can never be a cost center. A government can never be a business model. And Aadhaar goes ahead and transforms a state-citizen relationship wherein the citizen is seen as a cost center, and hence fiscal efficiency becomes the most important thing. Now, I just want to end with a small story. For me, I've been someone who's always seen technology as something that can do a lot of good for the society. I've never held technology to be value neutral. I've always felt that technology has a certain inherent value. In 2014, there was a huge collapse of houses in Mumbai, which is a place in Bombay. And they were houses which were poorly constructed, etc. There's a friend of mine who was there. He lost his father. Of course, he was a Muslim. He lost all his property and his identity papers in the 1992 riots. And then the housing collapse happened in Mumbai because he was in Baikula, and because of the riots and everything, he shifted to Mumbai, which was a different process of ghettoization. So you had Mumbai, houses collapsed, and he didn't have an Aadhaar card. And there was no way he could make an Aadhaar card, because just to get compensation, he needed an Aadhaar card. And at that particular point in time, I was still connected with the world of journalism. I ended up interviewing Arup Patnaik, who was the commissioner of Mumbai Police. And this is what Arup Patnaik said. All these people in Mumbai are illegal. they don't have any identification. We should go ahead and ensure all of them have biometric identification so that we are able to ensure that all the illegal activities that are going on in Mumbai are taken care of. This is the Commissioner of Bombay responding to a human tragedy, saying that how biometric identification needs to be used in order to ensure that illegalities, supposed illegalities, that are happening in a ghetto, which have been created by a certain kind of a riot which was tacitly sponsored by the state, right, goes ahead and creates that. My friend, okay, still doesn't have an Aadhaar card, still running from pillar to post, okay, has no identification document to prove that he's an Indian. He's a Mangalorean. The only crime that he seems to have committed is that he's a Muslim. Thank you.
Thank you, Anik, for inviting me to this workshop, and for one thing to hear all the inputs in this area, and also to be able to then make a few suggestions, because this is, of course, a subject which is of great importance in the way that we in India are evolving, and is certainly going to lay down a pathway for other developing countries of the same nature as to how they will choose to develop in the future. Let me deal with this in two overall heads. One is the concept of having this large data bank. You mentioned to start with that the data that should be collected, should it be just data for a just and inclusive society? Now, it's difficult to define as to what will be just data. And as Nikhil Dey has pointed out in his presentation, what I consider to be just sitting in the government is not necessarily what is actually just or what the public considers as just. Mr. Tudor Sala mentioned the question of the apocalypse and the divine being probing privacy. Is that just data? On the other hand, the access to information and collecting information has been so defined by Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General. The great democratizing power of information, democratizing power of information has given us all the chance to effect change and alleviate poverty in ways we cannot even imagine today. So collecting and amassing information, which of course would include data, would it be just if it was the objective was to alleviate poverty? And when President Obama took over as President of the US, in his first address to government officials, he mentioned that in our democracy, the Freedom of Information Act, which encourages accountability through transparency, is the most prominent expression of a profound national commitment to ensuring an open government. At the heart of that commitment is that accountability is in the interest of the government and the citizenry alike. So the heart of this then must lie in accountability and transparency. And if that is the case, then if I may go on to what Ms. Usha Ramanathan said in her introduction, that privacy is impossible in case of the profusion of technology. This is the stand taken by those in authority, and therefore places the question of rights versus governance. What my point before you is, and what has motivated me also in my own working, is that rights, when one talks of those, are the rights of the individual. And these, as President Obama has gone on to say, should become a means of strengthening governance, not the other way around. That we are talking in terms of the rights of governance as against the rights of the individual. So when we are talking of transparency and accountability, and we're talking of the government being transparent and accountable before the people, the same cannot apply to transparency of the individual. That because you are building a society of transparency, therefore the individual has lost his right to privacy. Now in India, unfortunately, despite the coming of the Right to Information Law, we have no law to protect the right to privacy. And this is, of course, increasingly important, because now when we are thinking in terms of collecting this data and making this data the basis for all access to all development works, it is imperative that the government knows, those in authority knows, that what is the red line, what cannot be crossed, and that is the right to privacy. The UK has its Data Protection Act of 1998, which seeks to protect the individual's privacy. That was an act to which I often referred in my own rulings under the Right to Information Act, because we don't have a Right to Privacy Act. So, like we have the right to information, like we have transparency and accountability, and have agreed that transparency and accountability must be the theme of the functioning of society, both the functioning of society and the functioning of politics. In that case, the ramifications of that, the fallout of that, must also be respected. And therefore, if you have a legislation to open up the right to information, which was intended to ensure that the whole of society and the functioning of politics became transparent and, in consequence, also accountable, that while ensuring that, we are ensuring that it does not intrude upon the right to privacy, because if a basis of democracy is a right to information, therefore another pillar of a democracy is certainly the right to privacy. Now, Ushaji had raised this question of corruption, and under that, people being made answerable to authority. In a democratic society, it is not the people who are answerable to the authority. It is the authority that is answerable to the people. And as she said, technology is not neutral. Therefore, the technology as it is developed should be such that it makes government answerable to the people. What then is the solution? She said, what are the solutions? Offer the solutions. I have a very simple offer to make. I will simply quote Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi said, in dreaming of a free and independent India, that the real Swaraj means independence, freedom, will come not by the acquisition of authority by a few, but by the acquisition of capacity by all to resist authority when abused. So that must be the objective of this concept of setting up a mass database. Democracy, Mrs. Swaminathan mentioned the question of democracy now coming to be defined by its development agenda, rather than development agenda being defined by democracy. And here we have the concept of the practice of how this has developed. When this whole concept of opening the Aadhaar card was under discussion, it stemmed from the same thinking which actually led to the decentralization of government in what we have now, Panchayati Raj, which led to the crafting of the Right to Information Act, and then led to the growing of the Aadhaar. In 2006, the Government of India received what is called the Sachar Committee report, which talks about the minorities and the benefits or the lack of benefits which they have enjoyed in independent India. And in that, one of the primary recommendations was the setting up of a national data bank. A national data bank which would then provide the basis for the functioning of a commission called the Equal Opportunities Commission. Basically the concept of ensuring that no section of the Indian community was deprived of the opportunities that were being opened up by the opening up of the country's economy. Now, the thinking of having that mass database or a data bank was that it would be able to identify where the challenges lay and thereby help identify the programs that were needed to overcome those challenges. It will also help identify injustices that were being done and thereby actually chart the way for the remedy of those injustices. I think the presentation of Nikhil and Shankar shows how far removed is the present practice of the use of this technology from the objectives that were set out. I do know that when I was Chief Information Commissioner, Nandan Nilakani, who was actually working on this whole concept of Aadhaar, had worked closely, and I had appointed an officer from the Commission to actually work with him in defining the categorization. So right to information and this data bank are two interconnected concepts. They're not independent. That is why I have emphasized this fact of ensuring the right to privacy and the other ramifications of what the right to information opens up. And the data bank was not an end in itself. Like the right to information, it was a means to an end. And a means to what end? I mentioned. A means to serving the people better, not excluding them from the development process. It was then a facility for the public, not to make things easier for the government, which is in fact how it is actually being treated. And unfortunately, all the recommendations that you might make from this House and from other places where this matter is under discussion is not going to be prove effective in making government also arrive at this concept. That is a means of serving the people, not the government. I am a retired IAS officer, and I can say with some degree of authority that as long as you keep the implementation of this project and the implementation of other schemes in the hands of the traditional bureaucracy on the basis of the data bank, you're going to have exactly the same results. the bureaucrat will find ways and means when he's told that he has to take this thumbprint. He will find ways and means, and what has been described are easily making things easier for themselves. Instead of going out and verifying, well, this thumbprint has shown something wrong, this is not his thumbprint, it's being shown as his thumbprint, I should investigate the matter, I should find out what the reality is. He will not do that. He says, well, this is the correct thumbprint, you're the wrong person. So this is how the bureaucrat would have functioned. So what do you do? I think this concept, Mr. Yasseri had brought out the question of a bottoms-up. But then he had pointed out that in a bottoms-up kind of arrangement, you have a lack of leaders, a lack of institutions, organizations, a collective identity. But that in India is not necessarily true. The reason why we went in for that whole concept of decentralization and Panchayati Raj was to try and see that those people, the public, the villager, the member of the village group called the Gram Sabha or the village council, he or she had the right to actually govern himself. And the concept of a panchayat in the constitution itself, Article 243, is an institution of self-government. So, would it make a difference if the institution which actually kept these records, verified these records, serviced these records, was located in the panchayat, not in the office of the deputy commissioner or collector? And as you might know, the office of the deputy commissioner, it carries an English name, or collector, but the concept is Mughal. Therefore, it is an imperial feudal concept. And I have often said that we are now in the business of trying to make an outmoded imperial concept service a post-modern technological form of governance. And that is, I see, exactly what seems to have gone wrong here. So I would plead against my colleagues that the concept of the data bank is not erroneous. In fact, I would agree with those like Mr. Swaminathan, like Mr. Yasseri, who have pleaded that in the present age you cannot do without it. It is a necessity. And because it is a necessity, it is necessary for those who wish to see the service delivered to the correct people, to the right people, who we consider right, somebody else may consider somebody else right, as was also argued. In that case, the systems must be so defined that they will deliver. And that, in my view, is my answer to the question that you put to me, is the object welfare or the object the people? Since it is the people's welfare you're talking of, you cannot talk in terms of servicing the concept of welfare without servicing the people themselves. My plea, therefore, would be to place the people at the center. It is they who must dictate the manner in which this will service them, not the bureaucrat sitting behind a desk who will say, this is how I will service them. Thank you.